Today's lesson is a review on graphing quadratics. We're also going to solve some quadratics using factoring and look at a projectile problem, and then in the next part we will be solving quadratics by completing the squares. So let's take a look at graphing to start with here. So the first problem, we want to isolate the y. So we want to get y by itself. So what I'm going to end up doing is just move this y over to the other side. Now when I do that, I have a negative y. So what I've got now is this negative y equals a 2x squared minus a 4x and a minus 6. So what I'm going to end up doing is dividing by negative 1, and that's going to switch all the signs. So here's the actual equation I'll be graphing. It's going to be y equals, and then I'm going to have a negative 2x squared, a positive 4x, and a positive 6. So some things I want to make sure I understand. First of all, it's an x squared, so I know I have a parabola, a U-shaped graph. I know it's going to open down because of this minus sign right here. I know it's going to cross the y-axis at positive 6, right at this point right there, because of this 6 right here. So those are some things I'm going to be looking at. What I'm going to do to start with those, I'm going to use that axis of symmetry formula, negative b over 2a. So I go ahead and substitute the negative or the 4 in there, so it's going to be the opposite of that, over 2 times by negative 2, which just makes 1. I take that 1 and substitute it in for these x's to find y, and I end up with a negative 2 times by 1 squared, and then I have a plus 4 times by 1, and a plus 6. So I know I'm doing something right when I have the first two terms are opposite in sign and one's double the other, and that's what I have here. This makes 2 plus 6 makes 8. And so I get a y value of 8, I got an x value of 1. This is the point at which we will start the graph. That is our vertex. And so I go over one space to the right, up 8 spaces, put the dot right there, and I use the parent graph. Now here's my parent graph. It's a y equals negative 2 times by x squared. So when I go over one space to the right or to the left and square it, I get 1 times by negative 2 gives me negative 2. So what that means is you go over 1 and down 2, and that matches my y-intercept of what I thought I'd have. I've got another point exactly opposite that. So when I square 2, I get 4 times by negative 2 gives me negative 8. So I go down 8. So always from the vertex, over 2, down 8 spaces, puts me right there. And then I've got another one right here. And then I can draw my curve that goes through those points. Do the same thing on the other side. So that is number 1, the graphing of the quadratic. You'll have some like that, and then you also have one that asks you some questions. Now in yours it might just ask for the time in the air, but I'm going to give you all 3 questions here: the maximum height, time to reach maximum height, and the time in air. So when you see a problem like this, you think about, where does it start? So remember how we looked at that y-intercept? Here we don't see a y-intercept, so that means that we have a y-intercept of 0. So we could write plus 0 here. That means the initial height of this, initial height equals 0. And that's what it was. And so when I look at that number right there, that's what that 0 tells me. And so I know it starts right here on the ground, and then it gets brought up into the air, and then it comes back down. So let's find out when. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to use that axis of symmetry formula, negative b over 2a. And so I go ahead and do some work there. I've got 24, the opposite of that's negative 24, over 2 times a, which is negative 16. Do some work there, negative 24 over negative 32. I can reduce the fraction down to a 3/4. So that's it. That's the time to reach maximum height, is just 3/4 of a second. That's all it took, just very quickly, not even 1 second, and then it reached that maximum height. Well, what we can do from there is, let's call this maybe 1/4. This is 1/2 of a second. Here's 3/4. Here is 1, and here is 1 1/4. And I'm going to go ahead and just add on one more section right here, and this is going to be end up being 1 1/2. And so at 3/4, I am up right at the top. Now I don't know how high up to go, but I know there's a line that is going to divide this parabola into 2 equal parts. And so we're going to find out how high we're going to end up going. Y equals, and so I'm going to take that 3/4 and put that in for this x. So negative 16 times by 3/4, and that gets multiplied again. And I'm going to square that number, and plus 24 times by 3/4. Now the nice thing about fractions is that they reduce sometimes. And so you'll see that in this case, the 4 goes into 24 6 times, leaves me with 18. So I know what the next number is going to be. I know it's going to be a negative, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be a 9, because one's always double the other. So let's see what we have here. This is a 9. This becomes 9 here. And this becomes 16 down here. And so the 16 will cancel out this 16, leaving me with negative 9. That's what I thought it would be. And so those are going to subtract to make 9. So 9 feet. That's how far it made it up. So let's go call these maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We can go up right there. Call that the maximum height there. And so our graph starts here at 0. It comes up. It reaches that point, and then it comes right back down. And it's going to end up crossing right there at 1 1/2. And so we go up 9 feet in this case. And the time in air, there's a couple ways we can do that. I'm going to show you both ways. First of all, symmetry tells me that since it started on the ground, it took 3/4 of a second to get up there. It's going to take us 3/4 of a second to get back down. So I know the answer is 1 1/2 second. But let me just show you another way to come up with that, because sometimes they just ask for the time in air, and you could just factor to come up with that answer. So time in air means that we're putting 0 in place of the y value. We want 0 for how high it ends up going up. We want this point and this point. That's what we're going to come up with. And then look at the equation. Negative 16x squared plus 24x. That's my equation there. I'm going to go ahead and take out a common factor. See, there's a common factor of negative 8. We could divide each of these terms by that negative 8, and let's see what we've got left over. So I've got the negative, actually I'm going to take out negative 8x. Negative 8x, and then what's left over is a 2x plus 3. And so this all equals 0. So I can go ahead and set these factors equal to 0. This is one factor, and this is the other factor. So negative 8x equals 0. So that would just mean x equals 0. The other one, 2x plus 3 equals 0. Well, I just have to do some opposite operations. Subtract that 3 from both sides. Take that away. I got 2x equals negative 3. Divide by 2. And let's see here. I took out a negative, so this should be a negative. I was wondering why things weren't going right. It should have a positive answer there. So this should be a negative because of these two signs right here. And so this will end up being a minus sign right here, so I'd have to add the 3 instead of subtracting. So there it is, 3/2. That's how I'm getting that answer of x equals 3/2, which is the same as 1 1/2. Same exact answer. So 1 1/2 second. Well, the next few problems are just going to be factoring problems. So you're solving by factoring, and this is always the fastest method to solve a quadratic, is factoring. And so look for those numbers that multiply to make 5, add to make negative 6. You've got the answer, and just use that zero product property. And so when you set the two factors equal to 0, you just do some opposite operations, and you come up with your answers. So here I'd have to add the 5 to both sides. Over on the other side, I'd add the 1 to both sides. So 5 and 1, the two x-intercepts. Well, taking a look at the next one here, this one's a little different because we have to subtract to make 4 this time. So 6 and 2 subtract to make 4. To make a negative 4, you make the 6 negative, 2 positive. And there we have it. So we go ahead and take those factors and set them equal to 0 and solve. So from that point, we end up having to add this 6 to both sides. And here we subtract the 2. So we get our two answers, 6 and negative 2. Well, this next one is a little bit tougher because you have the number out in front of x squared, but you always try to factor first because this is the fastest method to solve a quadratic. So I want the outside-inside terms to subtract to make 5, so I'm going to end up going this route, put the negative sign here, plus sign here, and see if it works. So this makes a negative 6x, 1x, and those will subtract to make negative 5x. So it does end up working. But once you're done, you're not done with the problem yet. You need to still solve. So to solve this, I need to do a couple opposite operations in this case here for this first factor. The next factor is a little bit faster. So the first one, I have to first subtract the 1 from both sides. I'm going to take away 1. And then I got that 2x equals negative 1. Then divide by 2. And that's how I get that answer of negative 1/2. That's one of the answers. And then over here, I have to add this 3 to both sides. And so that's how I'm getting the answer of 3. And those are the two x-intercepts. Next one, I need to move that 6x squared over, or move these two terms over. When you move terms, all what happens is the sign switch. So I'm just going to move both of those terms, the 5x and the 4, over, because I like the 6x squared positive. And then I'm going to try to factor that. And when I do that, I'm going to think of 2x and 3x multiplying to make 6. Now I want to get the outside-inside terms to subtract to make 5. So I want to multiply the 2 by the 4, 3 by 1. And you see what happens here. I get 8x and 3x. And you see how those can subtract to make 5x. So it doesn't end up working. To make it a negative 5, I need 4 to be negative. That'll make a negative 8. 3 to be positive, I'll make a positive 3, and subtract to make that negative 5. But you're not done. Still need to set those factors equal to 0, and then come up with an answer. So here we have the 3x minus 4 equals 0 as well. So you got to move that 1 over, so when you move it, it just changes to the opposite sign. Then divide by 2, and that's how they're getting negative 1 over 2. Over here, you got to move this 4 over, so you have to add it, so that's how they're getting 3x equals 4. Divide by 3, and that's how you get 4/3. So 4/3 and negative 1/2 are the two x-intercepts. Well, that's part 1. Part 2, we'll go over some completing the square to solve.